All right, welcome everyone. I am Megan Giesker from ALA's Public Programs Office. I'm pleased to introduce today's webinar, Media Literacy Education for Adult Audiences, Navigating Data Security and Privacy. Next slide, please. Before we start, I'd like to make a few quick announcements. Today's webinar is a presentation of ALA's Public Programs Office and is the second session of 5 in our Media Literacy for Adult Audiences Architecture of the Internet webinar series. This webinar series focuses on topics included in the recently published programming guide, which we will put into the chat for you. This program was made possible by a grant from the U.S. Institute of Museum and Library Services. The views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this webinar do not necessarily represent those of the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Hopefully, many of you are familiar with Programming Librarian, a website of ALA's Public Programs Office. We have a lot of program ideas and an online learning library full of free webinars like this one. Next slide, please. A couple of notes about our virtual classroom. Only the presenter has microphone access. Live captions can be enabled by clicking on Show Captions. Please use the chat feature to engage with your peers. To ask questions of the presenters or ALA staff, please use the Q&A window. If you are experiencing any technical issues, please use the Q&A feature to communicate with ALA staff. Next slide, please. Now I would like to introduce our speakers for this afternoon. Nathan Whitmire is the Library Systems Manager for Mid-Continent Public Library in Independence, Missouri. MCPL is a 33-branch system that spans 3 counties in the Kansas City metropolitan area. Nathan has been with MCPL for nearly 10 years, working to develop and maintain systems to support staff and customers. Library Systems is an 8-member team managing the library's integrated library system, website, online catalog, event and room software, and other custom web solutions. Nathan previously worked in online and print communications in higher education and public K-12 education, as well as local newspaper reporter and editor roles. Erin Kennedy is the Digital Innovation Manager with Mid-Continent Public Library. She leads a team of specialists who provide credible and up-to-date education on today's newest technologies. Through expert-led presentations, hands-on workshops, and more, the Digital Innovation Department explores the impact of emerging technologies on our world and equips library customers with the information they need to interact with them safely and knowledgeably. Kennedy has been with MCPL for 3 years, during which time she has overseen the development and launch of numerous major initiatives, including the creation of a new mission enhancement program and a district-wide needs assessment. Prior to her work for the library, Kennedy spent more than a decade in project management. She earned her Bachelor of Sociology from the University of Missouri-Columbia and her Master of Curriculum and Instruction from the University of Missouri-Kansas City. Outside of work, Erin enjoys spending time with her wife and friends, traveling, cooking, and exploring pop culture. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Nathan and Erin.
Okay, thank you, Megan. So I didn't see the chat because I'm doing the screen share, but I heard that a few of you responded to the question, what was the #1 song the day and the year you were born? We wanted to start off with this activity because this is a pretty common social engineering attack that happens on social media. It happens in email. If I have the day and year you were born or an approximation, like if I can get within a month or 2 of that, I can find a lot of data about you online. So that was really just an exercise to make you all aware of the sort of innocuous things that you can see out there that are huge privacy and security threats. I do appreciate all of you being so game and playing along. It does seem like a really fun thing to do, right? But we just, again, wanted to make you aware that a lot of these traps and scams are getting more sophisticated. So just to kind of talk through what we're going to be presenting today, our agenda is we're going to start out with understanding data security and privacy in libraries. Nathan is an expert in this space, and he's going to walk us through that. He's going to talk to us about laws, regulations, and secure systems, which are paramount, especially in today's library environment. And then he's going to walk us through secure behaviors for staff and patrons. And that's how we have this presentation divided, is how we can act for staff and how we can act for patrons. Next, I'm going to walk you all through the role of media literacy and data security and privacy. This is a media literacy series after all. And then I'm going to talk to you all about strategies for library staff and patrons, and that is divided out. I just ran out of space on the slide to divide them out in the bullet points. Moving on, I would like to hand things over to Nathan to start talking to us about data and security, data security and privacy in the library environment.
Thank you, Erin. And thank you for introducing our topic with a little fun exercise to kind of bring to mind some of the ways that people interact with us to try and get our private information. So if you're attending this webinar, you likely already have at least some understanding of how privacy and security impact library services and intellectual freedom. But a little framing might help to understand our approach and put a little slight twist on a topic that we would all like to be very clear cut. In 2019, the American Library Association offered a slate of amendments to the Library Bill of Rights, and that included a provision regarding privacy. That language nicely ties together the threads of intellectual freedom, privacy, and security, so we'll share that with you. All people, regardless of origin, age, background, or views, possess a right to privacy and confidentiality in their library use. Libraries should advocate for, educate about, and protect people's privacy, safeguard all library use data, including personally identifiable information. So this statement helps to recognize the essential nature of data security for privacy and the necessity of privacy for intellectual freedom. We will walk through the final list of what libraries should do in reverse order, starting with safeguarding library use data. One last point, data security is the combination, as Erin alluded to, of secure systems paired with secure behaviors. We're trying to protect and safeguard data about people for people. And for better or worse, the behavior of those people has a big impact on the success of those efforts. The behaviors expected should be understandable and actionable by most people. Otherwise, people are going to work around them and create a less secure environment, like with passwords written on a Post-it note on a monitor. So a good starting point will be what are libraries required to do? First of all, we're not attorneys. Please consult your library's legal counsel for specific guidance on regulations for your specific area. But in light of that, the general regulatory environment of the US regarding customer privacy is pretty much a patchwork of industry-specific requirements. HIPAA for healthcare, FERPA for higher education, and the Fair Credit Reporting Act for credit reports, among others. Much of the data that we store at libraries to work with patrons, address, email, date of birth, phone number, are considered publicly available and generally outside these regulatory regimes. Data about patron preferences and behavior, reading lists and the like, may have even fewer legal protections and are frequently viewed as the property of the organization gathering the data, not the person the data are about. However, an organization can be held to the terms that it states publicly in public privacy statements and other legal notices. All that said, protecting patron privacy is the right thing for us to do, and many advocates, including librarians and others in library service, are pushing for better, clearer privacy regulations in the US. It is best to put concerted effort into securing patron data Also, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and various state and federal agencies are increasingly working to guarantee that state and local agencies meet basic data security compliance to help prevent breaches. So, one of the important things to keep in mind, especially as we consider adult media literacy, is that the tech companies are generally far ahead of any government regulation. Often the data literacy of those implementing updates and new systems at tech companies is far in advance of the data literacy of those in government attempting to craft or update regulations or legislation. This it makes it especially important to keep up with the latest trends in media technology and how data about customers are used. That said, we'll take a look at a couple of additional regulatory systems specifically designed to protect customer privacy and place more agency in the hands of the people data are about. Keep in mind that as we look at these, unless you have patrons in the European Union or are a privately run library in California, these laws probably do not govern your operations. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation is designed to reframe privacy in a way that the people data are about become the owners of the data. So if the data is about you, you're the data subject, you're the owner, essentially, with companies who hope to use their data as data controllers and the corporations who do additional processing or handling of data as data processors. Much of the legal requirement falls on those data controllers and data processors. For those it covers, which is EU citizens, it requires transparency, accuracy, confidentiality, accountability, and portability. The system is not perfect, but it does an excellent job of reframing the conversation in a way that gives citizens or patrons much more agency over what happens and how. The California Customer Privacy Act takes a similar but lighter approach, and it covers citizens of California. However, government agencies are exempt from this particular regulation. Other states, including Colorado and Virginia, also have other versions of privacy legislation, generally with lighter or more business-friendly applications and means of regarding customer data privacy. So let's take some time to focus on the secure data systems. One key foundational recommendation comes from our information technology department, and that is to approach your data systems with a systematic framework that emphasizes fundamental priorities first. The ITIL framework is one example of such a model. Branching from that, here are a handful of thoughts about ways that we here at MCPL are looking to improve our data systems and data security internally. First, leverage single sign-on whenever possible, usually through an email provider or document storage provider, commonly Microsoft or Google. This can help because these providers are more likely to leverage the current best practices for user authentication and security, and we or our vendors may not always be able to keep up with these systems, keep these systems up to date as quickly. This has flaws, of course. Next, implementation of two-factor authentication can help harden systems, especially for administrative access and other high-level access accounts. It is important to think through what that staff interaction for a two-factor authentication system will look like and how well it might work for staff who might be part-time or others who may have different patterns of interacting with email or other applications from on-site full-time staff. When possible, avoiding shared administrative accounts is recommended, which usually requires a permission-based user access system that limits different users to specific permission groups based on their individual needs. Finally, many data leaks are a result of unsecured, often lost physical hardware that contains files with secure information. Risks can be reduced by limiting the need to download files with private information by interacting with the information strictly in a web-based or other format. Another great way to secure data is just to not have it. You can't lose what you don't have. Often, if a piece of data seemed like it might be of value, we might collect it and then worry later about how useful it might be. A better approach, especially in large systems where it may be easier to add than remove fields or data points, is often to consider deeply what we truly need to know, what is actionable, and what's just nice to know. If some information might be added, it might be useful to collect that data separately for a period of time, assess whether collecting it regularly is necessary or helpful, and then make a decision later on about whether to collect it long term. One example from our system is our use of the Savannah platform from Orange Boy. After a review of the data that we collect and share with them, we determined that old data files can be removed after a certain time frame, rather than retaining patron data both in the Savannah databases and in archived flat files transmitted to them on either end. So our hope has been to reduce the risk by reducing the data that we retain. For another example, we use the Symphony integrated library system from Circe Dynex, and we're currently in the process of assessing their privatized reports, which can allow us to retain checkout information for collection management purposes, but then sever the link in history data between checkouts and patrons, say a month after an item has been returned. As we also look at these secure systems, if our system is a bit large and you may be from a smaller system, so I would recommend, if you are, or if you have a very small IT support staff, find out what resources are available from your state that may be provided to local agencies. Here in Missouri, the Office of Administration offers guidance around cybersecurity, and so they may be able to help there. And the MORNET agency here in Missouri also works frequently with K-12 public education, libraries and hospitals and others to maintain the data infrastructure in the state. There may be similar agencies in other states that will provide guidance and insight and sometimes training around these issues. Sorry there, I kind of lingered on that one a bit. So now that we've talked about some examples of how to make data systems more secure, let's look at the behaviors that layer on top of data systems to keep things secure, starting with staff. The establishment of clear, acceptable use and staff software use policies is an important layer to be able to enforce expected behaviors. Explore the use of longer passwords, passcodes with multiple character types rather than kind of your LEET style character substitutions for passwords. This can be easier to remember, and if implemented well, it can be harder to crack. Regularly expiring passwords, however frustrating that may be, and requiring staff to update with a new password after a set time can also improve the security of staff passwords. Still in the realm of passwords and authentication, encourage staff to use password managers, especially those with multiple administrative accounts. We currently use Keeper along with our IT department. Be sure to check on the security of password management systems while you're selecting one. If you're at a public library that is a government agency or a public university library, it is important to work with staff to help them understand what information is discoverable under a Freedom of Information request, which could include email and many other communications. Finally, work with your staff to conduct a risk assessment activities for their online behaviors. Again, regarding secure behaviors, but now taking a look at our patrons. Having clear and up-to-date privacy policies and acceptable use policies, again, is essential. It can help patrons understand not only how the library uses and regards their data, but also the general environment for data security. Using secure networks for public and staff Wi-Fi access is essential, and wiping data after patrons conclude a session on a public PC or other public access device is also highly recommended. Secure data systems generally form a foundation, and within a secure data system with secure behaviors, then we are able to effectively safeguard patron privacy. Then the patrons can operate free from a sense that others are monitoring and explore ideas with the intellectual freedom they deserve. So let's take a look further at how we provide and communicate patron privacy. Zooming back out, it's important to recognize that all of this is, again, to help people. For most people, convenience directs behavior. It is if what we're asking is difficult or requires consistent attention, people may not do a very good job of maintaining a private environment. There are a couple of ways convenience and privacy interact with each other in different online environments. On the one hand, we should do what we can to make it easy and sometimes required for people to maintain access or information in more secure manners, depending on the nature and volume of information the patron is accessing. On the other hand, people have gotten used to sacrificing privacy for convenience in our online lives. Not everyone may understand that privacy and online convenience can be related. Also, not everyone may understand ways that they can maintain both the privacy they want or should expect and the convenience they want. Everyone's expectations around this balance may be different. When we're working with patrons, it's especially important to help them be informed of how privacy and online convenience interact, and then they can make the best decisions about what they want in their digital lives. And now over to you, Erin.
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you for setting up this next part of the presentation. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how media literacy plays a role in this. So the National Association for Media Literacy Education, NAMLE, defines media literacy as the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication, or the ability to encode and decode the symbols transmitted via media and synthesize, analyze, and produce mediated messages. Media literacy requires critical thinking, conscious management of data security and privacy, and responsible online behavior. Cornerstones in staying safe and secure online and with data. So it forces you to ask questions about the purpose of data and what is being collected, which are some of those best practices that Nathan was talking about previously. Referring back to that definition too, so why would the ability to create or produce media improve privacy and security awareness? Most simply put, creating content gives you a better understanding of what is going on behind the scenes. If you know how the content is being produced, you're going to have a better understanding of how pieces of data can be collected, secured, and protected. Modern media and historical media, for that matter, thrives on attention. Your attention and behavior equal dollars and profits for tech companies. It's critical for staff and patrons to understand digital media platforms are competing for your views and engagement, because there's a financial incentive for them to do so. So you really need folks to understand what is being monitored, and kind of going back to what Nathan said about, the more convenience you have online, the more privacy you're probably giving up. So you just really need to stay current with strategies to limit your data that is being tracked. For example, private browsing options, cookie settings, clearing your browser, all of those are really great things to stay on top of, so that you can keep your data safe and secure. In the current online environment, you have to accept that some of your data and behavior are being tracked and used as a part of using those sites and platforms. So your IP address, the time you spend on the site, clicks, shares, the device you're using, all of that. Those are all typically things that are going to be collected on pretty much any site or platform that you're using. Another thing is it's forcing you to stay current on common traps and scams, kind of like what we did at the beginning, and how to educate staff and patrons to avoid them. You want to reinforce that knowledge and good behavior are your best defenses. A good source of info on this is actually the FBI's website. They have a whole list of common scams and frauds. Yeah, that's in the chat now. If you look at that, they have it broken down by type of scam, and it's really good to stay on top of those. But also remember that government does move slower than the folks who are perpetuating these scams. So you kind of have to have a bit of an expectation that some of this is slightly behind the curve, because unfortunately, a lot of these bad actors online, they're just slightly ahead of law enforcement. So in looking at strategies for staff, just always remember that staff is your frontline response in keeping your data safe and secure for both protecting the organization and patron data. You can do staff discussions and in services and embed that in all of your tech education. So this shouldn't be a one-time event or once a year compliance training. While all of that is great, it's really good to have this information embedded in anything related to tech for your staff. You also want to do test social engineering attacks like we did at the beginning of this. And phishing emails are really good too if you work with your IT department, or you guys could probably, if you don't have an IT department, get a team of folks together to put one of these together. It's not particularly difficult. So we did a phishing test last year. We had 784 emails that it went out to in our system. We're a pretty big system. And just looking at the results of that, so 58% of our staff just deleted the message, and that's great. That's a good thing. But we had 14% use the report message feature in Outlook, which is what you want people doing. Deleting the message is great and it does protect you, but the report message actually alerts your whoever your security personnel that there's a potential issue. And then we still had 28% click the link in the message, which isn't great, and then 20% supplied credentials. So the point of this is not to punish people or say, haha, like you're doing a bad job, but it's really just to assess where your organization is with all of this, so you can identify those risks and gaps in your knowledge with your staff, because again, they are your frontline response. So just looking at some strategies for educating patrons. So in addition to keeping your staff informed, something that's helpful. So in the library environment, we're often, stretched pretty thin. And so to do education for patrons can be a lot, especially if you're in a smaller library. So partnerships are critical for education. and messaging, and they provide a bit of credibility. Right now, we're working on a partnership with the FBI to get some messaging out about security traps and scams. They are a great resource, and there are field offices, all over the country. However, that may not be an option for everyone. So some other resources to consider are local government resources, like with your state government, city governments, MoreNet, like Nathan mentioned. We have the Mid-America Regional Council here that can provide a lot of great resources. Also looking at schools and universities, if you have them in your town, especially technical schools, they're either going to have classes that are taught by experts who can come and help the library, or they're going to have somebody on staff who might be willing to help. You can also look at tech groups in your community. Another source of information is reach out to tech companies, even small ones that might be in your community, because they employ folks on their staffs who are experts in data privacy and security, who might be willing to come and do a program at your library. And I always, I'm always of the mindset, it's always great just to ask, because the worst that's going to happen is they're going to say no. But most people are very supportive of public libraries. So those are some options there. Also remember that data privacy and security are not one-time events. So it's good to implement compliance trainings that focus on these topics, classes that are focused on these topics, but it's good to embed it into all tech education you provide at your library. It makes it easier to understand how to behave more responsibly in everyday real world situations, because you're not looking at it sort of in a vacuum. If it's a standalone topic, you're able to make those connections. So for example, we have a class called Internet for Beginners, and we talk about cookies and pop-ups in that. We also talk about basic data security in our cloud storage class. And we also have an internet safety basics class that focuses on privacy and security, but that attracts a more advanced audience. So the other benefit of embedding it into all of your education is that it allows you to tailor that to a variety of audiences, because your patrons are all at different levels of learning typically. So it's good to kind of look at the content and assess where the typical learner for that class would be, so that you can tailor that information accordingly. Another thing to keep in mind when you're educating patrons is I think there is a tendency to stereotype who is a data or security risk, and stereotype that is an older person. Understand that all age groups are prone to data privacy and security risks. There's a rise in Gen Z actually falling victim to online scams. They're mostly financial scams. So there will be something on Instagram that says a 10% return on your money, no risk. And they go ahead and fill out their social security number, address, pretty much all of their information, and their data is stolen. So Gen Z was born between 1995 and 2012. They're, according to a recent Deloitte report, they're 3 times more likely to fall for online scams than baby boomers. That fact blew my mind. Gen Z spends about 4 hours per day online, whereas baby boomers are more likely to be scammed via phone or email, because the older generation generally has a less trusting relationship to online content than Gen Z. So understand that you need to have a multi-generational approach to data privacy and security, because it is not one generation. We are all susceptible to this. Another approach is physical and online educational materials to act as reminders. So we have a bookmark series called Is It Legit? It was kind of a fun little branding thing, and it's about different traps and scams that you can run into online. So we've got one on AI search result scams. That's a newer one where folks can use AI to game Google's top search results. So they'll make it look like you're going to Southwest, the airline's website, but it's not really Southwest website. And it's a way for you to call and hand over information to people who are not from Southwest. So it walks patrons through how to avoid that and how to make sure that the links that you are using are credible and the sites that you are using are credible. And then we have one on phone scams because there are AI voice scams where after 3 seconds of hearing your voice, bad actors can use AI to capture your voice and then scam your relatives, friends, whoever into thinking that you're in some kind of danger and that they need money. And then the other one is on fake social media accounts, and we're continuing to make those just as new information arises. So one thing to remember when implementing these is just make sure you have a plan for keeping materials up to date as information changes. So the key here really is just to make sure that you and your staff are staying up to date on all of this information. And I think that's kind of a point that Nathan was driving home as well, is just to keep up to date on all of this because it is constantly changing, especially with artificial intelligence entering the chat, so to speak. So those were just some strategies and tips for patrons that we had. And that is what I had on my end. And so I think we can open up the floor to some questions.
Great. Thank you both so much for that. There was rich with lots of information and lots of things to think about for sure. So as we get started with Q&A, if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask Nathan or Aaron, please put those in the Q&A feature. We do have some to get started with. And the first question is, what service do you use for a phishing test to staff? Do you have any recommendations for that?
I believe, so our IT team actually does that, but I believe they just used Microsoft. And then they had, I'm not sure exactly what the service is. I can find the answer though. But it essentially sets up a link, and the link, then if folks click on it, they're directed to take a quiz and watch a video for some additional education. But yeah, I can find that out after the fact. I'll make a note of that.
Great, thank you. Another question, is it legit bookmarks that you mentioned available online, or is that something that people would have to create their own version of?
They are print materials. If anyone is interested in those, I can definitely send PDFs. I don't know, Megan, if I would send that to you or whoever. I don't think we can print them for you all, but we can definitely get you all electronic versions.
That'd be great. We can upload it to the registration page where you all registered for the webinar. There's a copy of the slideshow on that page as well, and the recording will be there. So we'll post all any of those other resources there too, so you can find that later.
Sounds good. And just remember to, if you do use those, because I won't have a way to update those for you, just keep updated on those topics. Hopefully they won't change too much though in the next couple years.
And Aaron's staff also publish blog posts regularly. And so some of that information may be duplicated in blog posts that they have on our website. And so if you go to mymcpl.org and then visit the blogs link off the homepage, you can select technology blogs from the drop down that's on the main blogs page and see some of their prior content there.
Great, thanks. We can also put a link to that on our webpage as well. A few more questions already. What is cybersecurity insurance and how effective is it? Any thoughts?
Honestly, that's a new one for me. So, yeah, I just learned something new.
Yeah,
I'm
I
going
think
to research that.
probably within the landscape of how things function here, that's probably something that our IT department works with more. But I know that as we have like they've been working with insurers more, and those requirements have been increasing, and so we've been taking more and more steps to harden the systems here, and the greater use of two-factor authentication, especially for server access and things like that, have been a part of that process for us to make sure that we're compliant with those regulations or those recommendations. So I think for that, I, that may, I'm not certain that that is cybersecurity insurance specifically, but some of those processes have encouraged us to take steps to improve data security here.
Great. Thank you for that. And if anyone has any experience with that they'd like to share in the chat, please feel free to do so. All right, another question is, do you have any suggestions for bringing in other entities such as Office of the Aging, social services, something like that, to buy into the notion that a library is a great place to share information about current and latest online scams? So maybe going
Yeah.
back to some of those partnerships you were talking about.
So that is a great question, and that's something we're actually in the process of working on with our outreach department. So I would actually advocate for going the other direction. You should go to those folks. Look at senior citizen centers, communities, that kind of thing. The VFW can be great too, VA, all of that. Any place that has older customers, if you're wanting to reach that audience, but go out to those groups and talk to them about why this is something you need to be aware of, and B, why the library is the best place to get valid, credible, and relevant information related to those topics. Did that answer your question, whoever was asking that?
Yeah, that sounds good. But if
Okay.
the person that asked that has any additional, oh, and they just said yes. So excellent.
Okay, cool.
Another question is, do you have any go-to resources that you'd recommend for general privacy and security tips for interested patrons?
I think staff. Keeping your staff up to date. Go to it's honestly just staying current, different newsletters, blogs. I can't even think of like what I read right now, to be honest, but I'm always reading on these topics. And Nathan will tell you we're both like privacy nuts when it comes to online stuff. So I think that helps. But just kind of immersing yourself in information on the topic. One I found kind of helpful actually, which I don't know if I should say this, but like the Wall Street Journal has had a lot of really good information about AI scams and online scams. And so that's a good like starting point. And then just going deeper. I also like to look at sources of information, like from articles and blogs then to see kind of, where that is. But I would say number one is just making sure that you're getting your staff excited about this, because like honestly, when you talk about data privacy and security, right, like people are like, that's kind of boring, but there are ways to get folks excited, right? Like fake scamming them, people love and hate that, but it gets them engaged and interested. So I guess my answer is I don't really have any like go-tos off the top of my head. But I would definitely just say that like if you can get folks excited and engaged about this, then that is probably going to be your best resource.
Agreed. Yeah, that's great. Kind of piggybacking off of that idea, do you have any recommendations or knowledge of resources for teaching data security and privacy in languages other than English?
Yes, and it's very much like community dependent on what resources that you have. So we have a couple groups in our area that have offered to translate our classes. I'm going to be very honest that we're not there yet. We're a very new department, but it is something in the works. So my best advice for you would be to know your community and specifically have ties to the Spanish speaking community. Another good resource to kind of promote this information is if you have any Spanish language media in your community, build relationships with those folks, because then you have a presence in that community and it shows that you are attentive and caring about that community. I will say that a lot of these scams, and also I know this isn't about misinformation and disinformation, but I'm just going to like plug that really fast. There are a lot of that is being targeted toward the Spanish speaking community. Because, and we have an ELL librarian on staff, and her take on that was kind of that the community is more likely to believe information from somebody who is speaking their language rather than somebody who's, speaking English and it's been translated. So I would say it's very community dependent. I could tell you what resources we have in our area, but I don't think that's going to be particularly helpful. So I think just knowing those resources in your community and also partnering with those media resources to get your messaging out there can be very, very helpful.
Great. Thank you for that. It's really helpful. And this is a tough one. So see if you have any thoughts about this. Do you have any data or assessment tools for whether programming, the programming about data security and privacy is changing behaviors? It could be for staff or patrons, or any anecdotal stories you think maybe that could also help answer that question.
Well, I think just looking at the quiz results from when we did our phishing test is helpful, because you can see, okay, people clicked on the link, they compromised, accounts, and then they watched the video, got the education, and then take a quiz at the end. And yes, it showed some level of improvement. Um, I honestly think we could do better on that. I will be very forthcoming. I think everybody can be better on their assessment and data collection. With patrons, that's very, very hard because as you all know, as programming librarians, I'm guessing a lot of you are programming librarians here. You don't necessarily know who's going to come to multiple classes. You don't know if they're going to come back. So that's very, very hard to measure. If somebody comes up with a really great way to do that, please hit me up, because I would also love to know a pretty foolproof way to measure that.
Great, thanks.
It, it is a little weird conundrum to be promoting privacy and then at the same time kind of using some of those techniques that were some of the tools that we might be warning people to make sure to maximize their privacy in these environments in order to try to figure out like what's working and what's not. And that's a big part of the difficulty of navigating this area, because there's a lot of great uses of data to help people refine messages and get information to the right people. But at the same time, we want people to be able to act with privacy and feel like they can explore what they wish.
I think I have an anecdote actually, Nathan, as you were saying that. So, and sorry, I feel like I'm like talking too much during this Q&A, but anyway, so we had Kashmir Hill here back in June, and she wrote a book called Your Face Belongs to Us, which is about surveillance technology. Highly recommend it. It's terrifying what can be found. I see some thumbs up. Yes, y'all know Kashmir. If you have any pictures of yourself publicly on the internet, there are surveillance tools that can get a lot of information about you. Luckily, they're only limited to law enforcement now, but in the wrong hands, obviously. So Kashmir walked us through kind of her research and findings, and it was very, very interesting. And then at the end, we wanted to collect survey responses just to know how we're doing with the program. So we put a QR code up, because we're digital innovations, so digital data collection. And we had a patron come up and just kind of share some feedback after the program. And I was like, thank you for your feedback. I hope you fill out our survey. And she was like, no, that's too much information collected on me. So it was kind of like, and I understood where she was coming from. So I guess that would be an anecdotal kind of example of maybe some behavior being changed, although I don't know what she was like, before that. So, and yeah, but it is pretty weird to be like, come to our classes on Facebook, but also Facebook can be a privacy and security nightmare.
Thanks for sharing that. It's very disturbing, but interesting. Another question, any suggestions for implementing more data secure practices when we don't have an IT department? Any thoughts about that?
That is a challenging one. I think you'd kind of encouraged us, Megan, to think about like what might a smaller library do? And if you're, you know, if you're a public institution, then there may be ways that you can reach out to state agencies who may be affiliated to get their advice and their input on things that you can do. You know, when I think about that, I think that um, as in a larger organization, we have a lot of advantages with resources, but then there can come disadvantages to that as well, in that you frequently need to get buy-in from from a lot of people in order to change the way things are done. And so you may be a little more light on your feet, and so that might be an aid there, but I would try to explore what your state makes available internal to state agencies and see if some of that might be available to you. Explore the ALA materials that are available, and see like if there are consultants or contractors that you work with for your network infrastructure. Maybe they have recommendations as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, definitely tapping into local resources, like you both have said multiple times, I think is really important and can be a huge asset for all of these ideas as well. And it looks like that was our last question, which is great for time. But if there are any more, please feel free to throw those in the chat. We'll see if we have any remaining time. But as we wrap things up, I would like to extend a huge thank you to Nathan and Aaron for this presentation, and to my colleague behind the scenes, Samantha Oakley, for her support on this webinar as well. I would also like to thank the Institute for Museum and Library Services for making this work possible. The archived version of the session will be available to view online by next week. And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Aaron. We do want to encourage everyone to attend the other 3 sessions that we have left in this series. The link is on the screen right now, but we will also post it in the chat. The next session will be on November 13th, and we will be focusing on decoding algorithms for that one. And one final note, as you exit today, you will be prompted to take a brief survey. My colleague Sam has also put that in the chat as well. Please take a minute to fill it out. Your feedback is really valuable to us as we continue working on this important topic. And thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope it was interesting and enlightening. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone. I love seeing the floating hands come up. All for you, both.
When we saw the rest of your lineup for this series, we were like, oh, this is a really good bunch of
Yeah.
presenters.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're
I saw the ladies who were doing the one from New York Public and the Cobb County. They did there's the conference in San Diego this summer, and they were really good. So
yeah, yeah. I believe my colleague Sam got to attend that one too and see it. So she was great here as well. It was really interesting to hear her
yeah,
perspective. All right, thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
thank you.